All right. Well, Matthew Elliot, welcome back to the show, returning champion. How you doing, buddy? Welcome back.
I'm doing all right. Here we are. It's Tuesday. May the 4th be with some of us, I guess. I don't know. Star Wars people.
Yeah.
I saw it way back in the day.
Yeah.
And yeah. What can you say other than Disney bought it?
How about Arrested Development? Are you into that?
I am into it's kind of. I mean, I did with the whole fourth season thing. I did the binge. I went to a binge party. That was interesting. We watched all the episodes in a row and had lots of food and other accessories, I guess, party favors. I don't know. It was a thing. And now it's just what you do. Like, it's like, yeah, and a show dropped. I just I'm watching it. I'm not going to watch it.
I was just going to say happy Cinco de Quattro.
Oh, yeah. Yes. CC.
And I do think they recut that fourth season, and I do think it's actually worth a rewatch. It's much better. Yeah,
interesting.
They were recut it to make it like more like previous seasons.
Yeah, see, I didn't watch. I hadn't previously watched that much. I watched Arrested Development after the fourth season, so I just went in cold, and I thought, wow, this is a pretty cool. I like what they're doing with this. It's, they're going on the assumption that people know what's happening, but also are watching this end to end and not episodically. But I can see how, in hindsight, people who are used to the old format be like, what the fuck is happening here? I was just like, I don't know what the fuck is happening here. Who cares? This is funny.
Cool. Actually, me and my partner are rewatching season 1 right now, and it's really hitting. It's like hitting really nicely. It's perfect. Well, Matthew, I think it'd be best to sort of chat really quickly about a couple ideas that we had coming into our re-meeting. Now we can forego the format, the questionnaire, etc. And we could just sort of have a little bit more free-form conversation. But before the jump, we were talking about maybe talking a little bit about gatekeeping on the left and that being maybe surrounded around like reading and theory and just general gatekeeping. What's on your mind?
Well, yeah, I mean,
am I making that up? Okay.
No, I think there's definitely something there on multiple levels. I mean, anytime you have kind of in-group signaling going on. It doesn't matter whether it's political or if it's fandom. There's going to be a lexicon. There's going to be a shared collective understanding, and it can be difficult for people outside of that group to be integrated without, without having to ask a lot of questions. And I find that theory is one, it's a lot of it has grown out of academia, especially in the last, if you're talking about the development of new left thought, and the foundation that came from, it was largely from academic institutions and based on a lot of French philosophers and French political philosophers. And, that can be dense for anybody up including people who are involved in academia. And what I've seen, it's kind of interesting because when I started coming up online in the blogosphere, just by nature of who had access to the internet, these sorts of conversations it was normal to have them, because the people who are most likely to have a computer that was connected to the World Wide Web was somebody who was involved in academia or was a software engineer or somebody who had, a background that was related to higher education. And so a lot of these conversations just occurred naturally. And then at the same token, a lot of these people were also connected through science fiction fandom. So a lot of the old Usenet groups back in the day and Genie discussion board, the old Genie message board or whatever, bulletin board, that's what they called them, BBSs. Those were all like science fiction writers and fans who would get together. So a lot of the discourse that we've seen and how it's developed up to and including, whatever you want to call it, wokeism, et cetera, et cetera. It's stuff I recognize from years ago within science fiction fandom, because a lot of the figures who helped develop a lot of these ideas and kind of make the bridge from to a more generalized audience as web audiences grew more diverse were people who have been involved in science fiction, whether as fans or as writers or as both. So you have somebody like, for example, Patrick Nielsen Hayden, who had the Electrolyte blog back in the early 2000s. That was a pretty fairly prominent node for communication among the anti-war liberal left. And he's also one of the top editors for Tor Books, so Tom Doherty Books out of New York, and they publish science fiction. And so, his background, is grounded in that kind of science fiction fandom. So a lot of and science fiction itself, in fandom wise, is not remotely disconnected from politics. If anything, a lot of them have helped develop a lot of the ideas that we see here politically and have put them into practice. Isaac Asimov, Frederick Pohl were members. They were these golden age figures. They were members of a New York communist utopian commune called the Futurians. And they practiced free love and all this other cool shit in the 1930s, at the peak of the science fiction, the peak of communism, I guess, in the U.S. And so a lot of their ideas, because they were formative within science fiction fandom and especially involved in the, nascent message board, I guess, or internet of science fiction fandom, which was the letters pages of pulp magazines, where people would actually have regular correspondence with each other, which would then allow for, private correspondence. So you had this kind of discursive communication among people whose politics developed over time, and from that developed ideas in literature that later kind of filtered out into the mainstream in ways that you wouldn't expect. Like, for example, a group of extreme right-wing science fiction writers led by Jerry Pournelle and Larry Niven, who had connections to the aerospace industry and national security and shit. They very famously made a presentation to Ronald Reagan in the mid-'80s, giving them their opinion on the START program, which was a missile defense program that was basically bullshit. The idea that you can shoot Soviet missiles out of the sky, and but we're going to give a whole bunch of money to Boeing and shit to develop this idea for the next 50 years and maybe come up with a wrench or something at the end, real F-35 shit. But so for me to see, what I see is a lot of history repeating, I guess, in this roundabout way is my point. And the biggest repetition, the biggest rhyme in history that I see is people thinking that this is the first time any of this has ever happened. And a lot of that can, if you're reading theory and reading, if you're just, and not going beyond theory, not reading critiques of that theory, not reading the subtext behind that, the historical environment that these theoreticians and the people who are writing this were existing within, what the social context was, the political context, their economic context, et cetera, and how that impacted what they wrote. Some of the more, contradictory aspects of their personality that may undermine what they're saying. Like, for example, Frederick Engels was very much a white supremacist imperialist, and that doesn't negate what he was writing. It's just putting that in context of these people in the time and place they were in. Just because you had a certain politic about based on the class and the proletariat, that doesn't mean that you had a consciousness with regards to how race works as a construct, because of course this was being developed. Part of that development was through critique that came after that. It wasn't, in other words, it wasn't brought down from the mountain like Moses carrying the goddamn tablets. This isn't religion. It's people talking to each other and kind of doing what we're doing right now. Except right now we're doing it in a way that people maybe didn't have as much of an access. We take for granted, how broad literacy is, for example, right now. But that was a class marker, and in a lot of places still is a class marker, being able to read, and it's empowering knowing how to read, and knowing how to read in a society that has ample access to free lending libraries, whether they be official or, neighborhood drop boxes or anarchist libraries or even the goddamn Christian Science library. There are books out there. And a lot of people like myself who come from more of a working class background, that was kind of our cheat code to get into this discourse, this mode of conversation, this area of organizing. And you see there's a band from the UK, Welsh band, that some of your older listeners who are into Britpop and shit in the 90s might they're called Manic Street Preachers. And their primary songwriters Dickie Wire and Richie James were very hardcore Marxist-Leninists, and they were also dirt shit poor growing up. And a lot, they went to in the UK, it's all messed up. In the UK, the private school systems are called public schools. They didn't go to public schools. And they gave credit to their ability to have exposure to Marx, to have exposure to Che Guevara, to have exposure to all of these, revolutionary thinkers and such, was via their local library. And librarians are radical, even librarians themselves, you talk to them, they're, pretty goddamn radical. Like, I mean that in the technical sense, not in the woo Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles sense, but like, there's a reason why they stood up to the FBI back when they were trying to do these blind warrants on people during the run-up to the war in Iraq, and also the aftermath of 9/11, when there was a huge-ass crackdown on anybody who was Muslim or remotely resembled a Muslim. And there was an effort by the FBI where they wanted to gain patrons' lending history from libraries, and librarians en masse said, fuck that. That's the first stage to fascism. Freedom of thought and freedom of expression is one of the first tenets of that. And so, also open access. If you go to a library, let's say, let me put it this way: if you go to your library and you have a book that you need stuff from, I don't know what it's like, copyright wise in the U.S., but in certain academic institutions in Canada, you actually have to pay a fee because of licensing agreements that academic libraries have made with the trade organization that represents IP holders. It's a whole bunch of bullshit. It's part of the whole neoliberal war against the public commons, and it's being fought on all these fronts that you would never expect it to be. But the gist of it is, if you tell these people that you need a copy of a journal article and shit, they will goddamn photocopy it for you, because information was meant to be free. And most librarians, if not all, are open access champions. They want information to be available for people to read it. Like this whole idea of cracking down on websites because some rights holders aren't getting a couple of pennies chopped out there just because that library doesn't have a stamp on it that says library. It's still a free resource for books. And it's still, and all of these battles, for intellectual property, that's an example of the encroachment of the neoliberal state onto thought and trying to commodify everything. When you move everything from hard copy onto the digital realm, you're no longer buying a product, you're purchasing the license for access to the product. And they can revoke that access. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, very famously, a bunch of people lost who had 1984 downloaded to their Kindles, had that yanked off of there because of some rights shit that happened in the background. Apparently it was in the public domain and then it wasn't in the public domain, or somebody had the rights to it who didn't have the rights to it. The point being that a whole bunch of people woke up like, hey, what happened in 1984? I was reading that. And it's like, well, your access that you purchased has, expired. You no longer have access to it. And you're thinking, well, I bought the book. I thought it's mine. I should be able to do what I would like with it. And no, it's not yours. You've bought a piece of software that has DRM in it that allows you to use it in the way that they say you're allowed to use it until they say you're not allowed to use it. That's why all those movies disappear from your Apple Movies queue, why all that music will disappear from Apple Music, why sometimes you can stream something on Spotify and the next day it's fucking gone. All this IP bullshit happening in the background. Now, on the flip side, that's not to say that creators shouldn't get paid for their work, but most creators aren't getting paid for their work anyway. It's the corporations that own the rights that are making the money. Like, Spotify chops out millions of dollars to Sony and Universal and shit, and individual creators and independent labels get pennies. So I don't know how we got from here to gatekeeping, but I guess mainly it's access there, because if you talk about gatekeeping, one of the easiest ways to gatekeep is through copyright. Mm-hmm. And the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, as somebody who streams, that's something that everybody kind of lives in fear of, because it's a broad fist. You literally, all you have to do is, if you have a rights claim to something, say a bit of footage that somebody took of you that they're using in fair use, the platform that is hosting that literally cannot take time to say, whoa, let me check this out for context. They literally, once they receive that claim, have to yank it. So now that becomes a weapon against free expression. Yeah. You also see a lot more, I don't know if you've noticed lately, but it can be sometimes difficult to Google things that are unflattering to certain individuals. And that's, of course, because of companies like Reputation Management, which is owned by the Stagwell Group, which is the private equity firm of one Mark Penn, a name that people who are familiar with Democratic politics and may or may not be familiar with. He was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager and strategist in 2008. Or not manager, he was a strategist and her pollster. There, that was it. And of course, those two roles conflict with each other. He would constantly fudge the numbers in order to fit with his preferred strategy. And his preferred strategy was to run California as if it was a first past the post vote instead of a proportionally allocated. So they thought they'd won California. He was counting on delegates they weren't getting. The gist of it is Mark Penn is. He owns the Howard Harris poll that works with the Harvard Harris poll that does a lot of polling with Harvard in conjunction with Harvard University. He also owns Targeted Victory and what's the other one? He basically owns the two biggest firms, consulting firms in D.C. on K Street for both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. In other words, he plays both sides of the field. He has his own agenda. Oh yeah, and he's also his wife also is the president of No Labels, which is the super PAC or the PAC. I'm not sure which designation they have specifically. They've changed around in the last few years, but they're the ones who are behind what's called the Problem Solvers Caucus in Congress, which you might be familiar with in Chicago, that primary that got kind of ugly with that one pro-life dude. They had a campaign. Some of your national viewers might not remember this or be aware of it, but there was this really nasty Democratic primary campaign a couple of years ago in which some texts got pushed out to people stating that one candidate was a Nazi. Now, there actually was a Nazi running, but the problem is she wasn't running for the Democrats. So I believe her name was Marjorie Greene. Don't quote me on that. I'm just spitting off the dome here. But the point being, it later came out that this effort was being done by No Labels organizers, and that the people underwriting No Labels were a bunch of Chicago billionaires. And it was basically a slush fund for them to push their political agenda. They had their connection with the Problem Solvers Caucus in Congress, which is kind of the centrist assholes like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema and all that. And they have this kind of mutually assured destruction agreement with the Republicans that they caucus with, in which they're going to basically prop up each other's votes. So you have this mass purple glob blocking everything in the middle. And it's basically a way for corporations to push their agenda through caucus. It's the new version of the Blue Dog Caucus that was the centrist fly in the ointment back in prior years. It's why electoralism kind of can become a tar pit that people get caught in. It's only one element of where we're working in, and the higher you go up in the food chain when it comes to politics, the less room you have to wiggle because of how much money is involved. That's why I think if the left is going to organize an electoral field, it's good to start small, like the New Right did in the 60s and 70s. Start by getting dog catcher and school board elected. Like, why do you think municipally the school boards are so uniformly conservative? It's because they have their block of people, and also on the flip side because the left just doesn't show up. Like, when you get to a municipal level, sometimes the balance of power hinges on who shows up. And if the same people keep showing up every year, they're able to entrench power and to garner favors and to thus make it more and more difficult to become disentangled from the system. And so, an inside-outside strategy is imperative. And I'm not saying this from a position of leadership. I don't consider myself a left leader, or even frankly like the idea of leader or a hierarchical structure within left spaces. Part of the thing I liked about, while I'm not a utopian myself, one thing I liked about utopian movements is how they dream about alternative systems. And in the 70s, you saw a lot of people trying to put those into practice, whether it be within education or cohabitation, childcare, gender, etc. There was this kind of collective drive to find things beyond this, the nuclear family that had grown post World War II. And of course, the Reagan era tried to entrench the notion that model, the Leave It to Beaver, mom stays home, dad goes to work, everybody lives in the suburbs and is white as fucking mayonnaise. Like that was the dominant norm. That's the way it always was. That's the way God intended it. And anybody saying otherwise is a communist. And of course it was bullshit, because the liberal consensus has barely existed for, it was a sliver. The liberal consensus was an anomaly in not just human history, but even in the 20th century. This idea of America being built on pluralism or built on bipartisanship and on cooperation and all this bullshit. It's all about power. It's literally about leveraging power. If you look through the history of how the founding fathers actually rammed together this mess of a beast that's called the United States of America, it was a process, and I mean that in the meat packing term. Like processing is always ugly and messy, and it took from the revolution on to the late 1960s, when you had it wasn't really even, you can't even fully say it was completed, but it wasn't fulfilled. The promise wasn't fulfilled until you had the passage of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s. Because prior to that, of course, you had what amounted to an apartheid system within the certain parts of the United States, a legalized racism, and it's just wild to see how easily history is rewritten and is forgotten, especially within societies that are, in post-colonial contexts. Like when you have both Canada and the U.S. are former colonies. Canada has, of course, a different relationship to the former British Empire, because we're part of the Commonwealth, whereas you guys fought a revolution. But you also, of course, have territories and commonwealths and such that have been acquired. You accept that, you basically came up with your own corporations that were similar to the British India Company, except now they were getting bananas in fucking Guatemala or whatever. All these dirty wars that were being fought that led to the various revolutions in Central and South America were all based on economic activity and expansionism on the part of the United States, in both prior to and especially following the Cold War. And so I think about theory, and I think about history, and I think about practice, and I think it's way more important to know the history of what has happened to the left rather than how the left became the left. The theory is fine and good for when you're sitting around having a joint with some buddies, whatever, or when you're, contemplating yourself. But there's also a lot that we can learn from how prior actions, organizations, what have you, what has happened with that, how, for example, how the capitalist state, the bourgeoisie, whatever you want to call, whatever layer you want to see, how they've responded to any kind of, even the most minute progress. It's always been a concerted backlash, one that is very well financed, like the New Deal. The reason why the New Deal is as compromised as it is because there was a concerted effort amongst business leaders in the United States that felt that the New Deal was the next stage towards communism, and so they sort of created what has grown into the more libertarian esque edge of the Christian right, the white evangelical Christian right. A lot of that is a fiction, or not a fiction, but a construct that was meant to push back against FDR's expansion of the state in reaction to the Depression. And because prior to that, a lot of Christianity, especially Protestant Christianity, mainline Methodists, things like that, there was more of a live, let live, kind of separate church and state, separate the, keep politics. Politics is something of the world. It's not something that, that you inject religion into. And, white evangelicalism is the opposite of that. It's very much the idea that, various ideas that, I don't want to get too into the weeds with a lot of terminology and shit that will fuck with people or require lots of Googling, but the doctrine of the elect and predestination are two important concepts, and Calvinism. They believe in work ethic, but also that there are certain people that are more special in God's eyes than others, that are chosen by God in order to lead and triumph. And a lot of influential political figures believe this. So while they may not be vast in numbers, they do have a lot of powerful influence. And you saw a lot of those influence peddlers pushing Ronald Reagan, pushing George H.W. Bush, pushing Bill Clinton, pushing definitely George W. Bush, even Barack Obama with Rick Warren and people like that who are, if you notice, there's never really been an atheist president. The closest we've ever got to having atheist presidents were John McCain and Bernie Sanders, and neither one of them would ever admit on a hot mic that they're atheists, because that would disqualify you. You could come out as a communist. Literally, Bernie Sanders can say he's socialist, but he has to, okay, yeah, they have to push the fact that he has, a Jewish background, but part of his Jewish background is atheism, and that's a tradition with Judaism, because it's not Christianity light or proto-Christianity as a lot of people like to push it. And whereas John McCain, everybody knew that guy was an atheist, but suddenly, because he's running for president, he has to pretend he's a Baptist and shit, and the religious right won't touch him with a 10,000.5-foot pole, because they know he hates their guts, and vice versa. And that's where Sarah Palin came in. She was the bridge to the religious right, and to make them, don't worry, he's old, he's probably going to die, and look, you'll have one of yours president. And so they got a taste of that, and then they're like, no, we want Trump. They're like, they couldn't have Palin. They knew she was dead in the water. But so Donald Trump was the next big thing. I'm firmly of the belief that if Trump had continued his run in 2012, things might have gone a lot differently. It comes down to popularity and name branding. He was at his peak popularity. He was polling pretty high until he wasn't. That doesn't mean anything when you're that early into the process. And Mitt Romney was the wrong guy to run when you're economy looks like that. Like, by all models at that point, Barack Obama should not have won re-election in 2012, much less won Ohio again. And yet he did. And that's not because of holding the black vote. He held the white vote in these states as well. Like, what happened was Romney voters just didn't show up. Romney fucked it over. He had that 47% gaffe. He had his car elevator. He was a rich ass motherfucker and also he also had a record as being a liberal Republican when he was the governor of Massachusetts, who was running on a far right political platform, one that he adopted largely to appease the base that was backing Donald Trump. And of course, by doing that, he's already showing that, he's already embraces his inauthenticity and his opportunism. And so anybody who's kind of a swing voter on the fence, they're already leaning a little bit on, like, come on, at least admit, I believe, I brought healthcare. Yeah, I did this. Yeah, I did that. Own your triumphs. If you've actually had some successes, then embrace it. But no, he can't. He was caught in that rock and a hard place of, the broader public did not, the opinions of the broader public did not reflect the opinions of the Republican primary base that he needed to become the nominee for the election. And so he had to play for that base. Now, Donald Trump, being a celebrity, much like Ronald Reagan was a celebrity candidate, was able to kind of transcend that. And I would argue Obama, because of various factors in 2008, became a celebrity candidate, and thus was able to overcome a lot of negatives, starting with his race, followed by his name, that should have disqualified from him out the gate. But the Clinton campaign counted on disqualifying him, and instead became part of his appeal. And his appeal expanded the electorate, which is I think the biggest success of that. Like Obama, I consider a success to the left. I don't think any presidency will ever be a success to the left, because the presidency is inherently corrupted. There's no way, once you take control, you automatically become the enemy of the people. Period. That would be Bernie Sanders. If he had become president, he would automatically become enemy of the people, because he's now the president of the United States. He's no longer Bernie Sanders, populist candidate for president. He's now Bernie Sanders, president, and he takes on every single last drop of blood that the United States has ever spilled the entire time, whether you like it or not. That's part of the accountability. That's part of the responsibility that you have for wielding that much power. It's not a blank check, and it's not absolute. You're beholden to the people, and including the people who you've crushed in order to achieve this level of power and control in the world. Jimmy Carter is one of the few people, through his devout Christian upbringing, who kind of understood the gravity of that, which is why he didn't monetize his tenure. It wasn't because he couldn't. If he wanted to, anybody can make money. It doesn't matter how much you belly flop. There's always somebody who wants to have an ex-president on their masthead of some corporate board. But he understood that the rest of his life, he had to make restitution for everything that not only he had done, but every president before him had done. And
he sold his peanut farm.
He sold his peanut farm to get in. That's what you did back then. But he also has, done, not just performatively done things, but he lives a life of Spartan poverty, basically, relatively speaking, compared to other presidents who have become globe-trotting superstars and everything. And a lot of that is because he recognizes that you make a lot of compromises to your values when you choose that path. And that's something you have to be prepared to account for once you're off that path. And that's why I consider Obama to be actually somewhat of a disappointment as president. So he was a successful candidate and a disappointment as a president, not just because he wasn't very good as president, but because after becoming a president, he's become the stereotypical ex-president who is doing shitty things and kind of lining his own pockets and entering into business arrangements with, billionaires and people who run in elite global circles. I'm trying to come up with ways to make this populist without sounding anti-Semitic. The majority of these people aren't even fucking Jewish, but it's just so wild. You start talking that's how this is how insidious the discourse that comes from the far right is, because of course they do take issues that are important like globalization and then turn it into, they distort. This is what fascism always does. It doesn't create, it distorts. So suddenly these words become dog whistles. It becomes jargon. It becomes a euphemism. So instead of describing a phenomenon being a neutral descriptive term, it's now a weapon in the culture war. So you can't even, even something like saying an international banker. Now that, of course, is a major dog whistle. And I think people should recognize that one, because that's straight out of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. But it's also true that neoliberalism is, rather than the devolution of the state, it's more the encroachment of the corporate superstate as a transnational entity. And by that, I mean multinational corporations that don't give a fuck about what your local environmental laws are, and then subsequently enact global treaties that supersede national laws when it comes to things like the environment, trade, health regulations, what have you. So, that's kind, and neoliberalism is, again, an example of a technical term that has been distorted and weaponized and euphemized and so on and so forth. So that's, again, why I'm kind of not, I'm kind of leery about, you bring in gatekeeping. You see why somebody coming from the outside, how they could be confused, and you see people throwing around terms that they themselves are don't even know what context they're using them in, and can, depending on context, can mean multiple things, many of them contradictory. Yeah. I see people online, if you see an argument in Twitch circles between radlibs, socidems, and libsoc, what the fuck does that? They're all liberals, and it's like from The Office, it's the same picture. I look at these people, I'm like, who are you? You're what? And then the ex-Nazis. I will never get over the ex-Nazi cohort. That is the weirdest fucking shit ever. Yeah. And
you say something like gatekeeping, and people are going to be like, is that when Melinda Gates divorces Bill?
Gatekeeping is basically
over IP, by the way. Maybe.
Yes, over
maybe
IP.
Maybe it's over IP, right? Yeah.
Well, it quite possibly is. Gatekeeping is basically efforts that people make to kind of erect barriers for people to participate. Like you're too cool for school. Like think about the clique in the cafeteria that is talking about shit that you don't understand and can never understand, and you try and join in, and they treat you with contempt because you said the wrong thing or approached it in the wrong direction. Now, that's not to say that it's an open social club. You welcome everybody in, everybody has the same role, et cetera, et cetera. It's more that we shouldn't be deliberately excluding people who are natural allies. And I definitely think that the non-voting population that hasn't necessarily had, for whatever reason, had access to this, or does have access, but doesn't feel like they would be included within these spaces the ability to join it. And I know these conversations have been happening in academia for years because I've been privy to these conversations in academia, you know, how jargon and specialized study and the terminology and kind of the insular nature of that and the circular, you know, fucking human centipede shit that ends up happening with all of that. It just, you know, eventually, you know, what you see, that kind of backlash that you see now of anti-wokeism is just people come from the outside looking in on things they don't understand and kind of making up the guys to get mad at because they don't understand it. What is critical race theory? Well, it's actually a legal theory. It doesn't have too late. Yeah, they've already thought they don't get it. Like all of these big bugaboos of the classical liberal, whatever, anti-wokeist. Well, I don't even know what the fuck they're calling themselves now. The jack-off crew, those guys. Anyway, it's all based on this fundamental misunderstanding of complex legal theory. And unfortunately, a lot of the people on the left who also picked up that discourse, and then the neoliberals after them who instrumentalized it and commodified it, they have no clue what the fuck they were talking about. Oh, no. So if you don't even understand what you're saying, you can't explain it, you can't present it in a more palatable, user-friendly manner, what the fuck are you even talking about? Like, what does intersectionality even mean anymore? Like it's been so perverted and so distorted, identity politics, et cetera, et cetera. These things all have very specific meanings, very specific, and yet the way that they are used in general discourse is completely, it's headache-inducing. It's just, no. And that's on all sides. And that's not me saying both sides are wrong. That's just me saying both sides need to log off and maybe read some history. Like read some Du Bois. Du Bois is good. That's some good shit. If you want a good Marxist follow-up to fucking Capital and the Manifesto, read some Du Bois. It's Frederick Du Bois. More and more people are saying this. It's I don't know. It's been a long day online today. I don't know if you've taken a look at the internet, but it's bad.
What happened? What are they talking about?
They're talking about farming.
Farming?
Farming. Apparently, gardening and guns are and gun safety or something is now.
Essential life skills, right?
Yeah,
I did see the tweet. Actually, I did see it.
You did see it, and I don't know how these things will. I think people really do need to go outside and touch some grass and log off or don't touch grass. You know, there are a lot of ticks out there. You may have allergies like myself. I don't know. I'm not telling you what to do. I am saying that picking these nits and fighting on a platform that doesn't even allow for straight linear conversation, thus baking miscommunication into the pie, is just dumb. Like, I won't argue with people on twitter.com because I don't even know if half of my things are being seen by them, because if you haven't noticed, those comment threads go and have sub threads, and like it's literally designed to make conversation impossible. And yet they're saying they're trying to have a conversation and have a healthy conversation. No, they're not. They're trying to garner engagement is made by miscommunication. Controversy creates cash. That's how these. I don't think these people are seeking clout. I do think that they've seen a mode of that I recognize from the blog world, because blog wars, with these 1,000 comment threads of people just fighting with each other over nothing, those did garner a lot of hits. And for ad-based revenue platforms, that was great. It was like, it was sweet. Like, let's gin up as much controversy as possible. Thus the hot takes and all this. And yeah, that will get you, lots of likes and retweets and maybe even a few, response streams. But it also just takes a lot of time and energy that could be used a lot more productively in other areas. And I'm old. Nobody wins when you're arguing on the internet, especially when it comes to debate. It's not an e-sport. Like, the gamification of discourse to me is something that needs to be destroyed. And I don't think that this is a new phenomenon. Like the whole Oxford debate thing and the debate club bullshit that no, I've done all that. And part of that thing is being able to argue things that you don't actually believe in. You're literally arguing for the sake of arguing. And that drives me absolutely nuts. Argument is a means to an end, and if it becomes an end unto itself, then it's just masturbatory. And why? There's no happy ending. There's just no happy ending, folks. Like,
well, masturbation has a happy ending. Isn't that
exactly.
the point? Yeah.
This is I don't know. This is edging, I guess, except it's in reverse. I don't even know where, like, I used to hate debate, like, for real. Yeah, like, give me a good discussion. Give me a good round table. I like, 5-6 people all in a circle. Let's all give our ideas and kind of bounce it off of each other. No, this one-on-one. This is what happens when you let gamers become leaders and organizers. All they know how to do, they can barely moderate their own goddamn forum. We're expecting them to somehow, Pied Piper a generation of lost Nazis into leftist revolution. Fuck off. Like, get over yourself. Like, you're doing it for the subs and the streams. Controversy creates cash. Fucking. I can't take any of it seriously. And yet you have to take it seriously because other people take it seriously. Thus the frustration. This for a generation of kids, we laugh, we scoff, but for a generation of kids, and I use that deliberately because they are fucking young, but for a generation of kids this is their introduction to politics, the same way that for a lot of people, The Daily Show was their introduction to adversarial politics and to political critique. And so, it pains me to say, but Vosh is our Jon Stewart and Destiny is our oh God, I can't even go any further, but you know where I am.
Can I just be our Mr. Rogers? That's all I want to be.
You want to be the Mr. Rogers? And I think we can do it. You might have to shave a little bit and lose some weight. Maybe nose job. Start swimming daily.
So the show's over. Thanks for the chat, Matthew.
I'm just saying. The cardigan. At the very least, the cardigan and the house shoes. That's a must. Shoes.
Brilliant. Okay, we can keep going. You're right, by the way. You're right. Yeah. The left. I'm so sad that you just eliminated that idea that Vosh is our Jon Stewart. I wish I didn't agree with you, but I find myself more and more coming to that I thought.
And that's not even like I don't know if that's even that insulting to Jon Stewart. Maybe it is because I don't think Jon Stewart was that great a model for people to emulate anyway. But you didn't
like him.
It's not that I didn't like him. It's just more. It's hard to articulate. But after 9/11. It was almost the wiggle room to operate on the left was really narrow. You had a hardcore shift to the right when it comes to public consciousness, and by that I mean people really were getting canceled for their political opinions. Not this people were mean to me online shit, but suddenly Susan Sontag and Noam Chomsky are persona non grata because they said, well, hey, maybe we should think a minute before bombing Afghanistan. And their leftist colleagues who for years were, comrades in the struggle against war were like, no, this is in fact a good, just war. We must do something. This is not the time, yada, yada. And suddenly you're crazy for saying this. I'm like, whoa. So people had to tread really carefully with how they said things because you were putting your career on the line. Dixie chicked is still is a term in Nashville circles. It's something people fear. It's why you see Dolly Parton being very cautious about expressing her political opinions because even she, who is somebody with as much power as she has, her venerable status, she's afraid of facing the same consequences. So if somebody with that kind of power is afraid of what the corporations that run the industry would do to her, what some Joe Schmo out there, Phil Donahue, his show was one of the highest rated on MSNBC, and because he was the only critical voice against the Iraq War in 2003, it was canceled. And a memo later came out that stated that this just isn't the time to have Phil's point of view on TV right now. In other words, they wanted a united front behind this extremely popular 90% president. We're going into Iraq. We're going in. Now, so that's why I kind of find it interesting when people look back and say, well, everybody knew that the war was bad back then. I'm like, well, depends on what world you were in. It depends, for people, 40 and under, yeah, chances are your circles were pretty anti-war. And when you get a little bit older, a lot of people were for the war. Like a lot of people who were a lot of the figures that later became prominent critics of the war initially supported it. And they made that pivot because the war started to go to shit. Yeah. There was actually a very small cohort of people in public commentary circles anyway, who were ardently, unequivocally against the war in Iraq. There was a lot of middle ground people who were like, maybe we should give the inspectors a little more time. We know that there may be some weapons. No, and then there was very few people like, this is fucking bullshit, and we know it. And this is, they're trying to bomb our way into another dumb oil war, and oops, they bombed their way into another dumb oil war, and oops, who could see this coming except a bunch of dumb kids and sucky bloggers? Hi, so that's also my point, an interesting point, in the whole ex-Nazi conversation and the sorts of people who have pivoted from not say extreme Nazi ideology, but from more sensationalistic / provocative alt-right positioning or what have you, who have now suddenly seen the light and become liberals or even socialists. And I kind of think about the same people who, when it became untenable business-wise, who were pro-war, they suddenly pivoted anti-war so they could enjoy the same platform and sphere of influence that they enjoyed when their views were then the contrary views were popular. Like a lot of it is simply just people who know that their brand is starting to become stale, and so they got to rebrand. And the way that it's happened so great, and that's why I can't really blame people in Twitch circles or say they're doing anything new, because I've seen it happen in so many different areas. I mean, look at how many former Republicans are now Democratic cheerleaders and have positioned themselves as decision makers and thought leaders in the liberal center. People like Rick Wilson. Wilson, the dirtiest player in the game of the dark arts of spin doctoring. And he just on a dime. And now you have all these liberals who simp for him. People like Max Boot, fucking even oh my God, Bill Kristol. How the fuck does he even have the shame to open the guy who gave us both Iraq and Sarah Palin? Shut the fuck up, go away, and never come back again. I don't care. David Frum, my God, why is that man not strung up at the goddamn head?
Wow.
He's on the cover of fucking The Atlantic saying this is what we should do for the left to win. Fuck you, you unindicted war criminal piece of shit. Yeah, I said it. You want to sue me? Fuck you.
3 minutes here, Matthew. 3 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, loving this. And again, all I remember asking you was, "Hi, how are you?" It's just incredible how we have these chats.
I know. Amazing.
No, I love this so much. I would never interrupt you for anything. Well, what else in the last 3 minutes, Matthew? We got the gatekeeping. We got the Melinda gatekeeping. We talked about really important things there. Just those two. That's all I remember.
I think people should follow what's happening in India with regards to the spread of COVID and the disparity on how, kind of vaccine colonialism, how you have India producing all of these vaccines that are being shipped out and they're barely getting anything themselves, how certain intellectual property agreements that were established are preventing them from having the source code and being able to go into production to mass produce their own supply. I think let's kind of pay a little attention to what's happening in India, because it's a humanitarian crisis on an unimaginable scale, and I think it's a lot more important than arguing over fucking a garden tiller and a shotgun.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, that's all happening on top of the farmers' protest, which is just on the tail end of decades of farmers protesting for fair treatment over there and getting screwed over by the neoliberal Modi administration.
Let's just say fascist. We'll say fascist. Yeah. I'm very perfect. Other people are comfortable calling him fascist, and I guess this is what we'll leave it off here. There's a very thin line between neoliberalism and a fascism, and it's how well your suit is cut. That's basically it. Like, if you think about it, the ideal model neoliberal state was Pinochet's Chile. Like, I'll leave it right there. And now I'm seeing neoliberals online adopting the helicopter meme. And I'm just like, well, welcome home. I mean, I want to say you're wrong, but I'm also saying, nope, I thank you for heightening the contradictions for me. Like,
wait, what's a helicopter meme?
Pinochet very famously used to take political dissidents over the ocean and drop them from helicopters to their death.
Fucking okay. I'm sorry. I didn't understand. Okay, now I understand.
Yeah.
Great place to end it.
There we go, on a happy note.
Matthew, this is incredible. I always love our chats. I'm just going to encourage you to sign up whenever you want to and get you back on here whenever the fuck you want. The door is open. I love our chats. I'm really enjoying this. I gotta let you go. You know, I got another chat right after this. Going to be talking with Kenzo Shibata about what's going on.
All right, I'll go over to Kenzo like we're on MSNBC.
Yeah. We'll kick it to Kenzo here. We're going to be talking about Janice Jackson. She stepped down as CPS CEO, and we're going to see what's going on. Chicago education's pretty wacky.
Well, then it's okay.
Okay. All right. Well, again, we invited you in the spirit of building leftist unity, strength, and power. Matthew Elliot, you're a beautiful goddamn human. I'm so happy to be your friend and to have the chance to talk with you. Peace. Solidarity, bro. All right.
Peace. Solidarity. Bye, everybody.
Yup. Oh no. Oh, that happens every time. Matthew Elliot. God darn it. Gorsh darn it. That was great. I enjoyed that a lot. Hey, YouTube. You're watching a clip from my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/iDanSimpson, where you can follow for free and subscribe for only $5 a month. Thanks for watching.